The late Queen Elizabeth II and her sister Margaret may have had differences in their behaviors and personalities, but they remained practically inseparable. And regardless of what was going on in the other's life, they never strayed too far away from their sides. So, what was this primal bond shared between these two British royals? Watch this video to the end to find out all there is to know about the Queen and her sister. The late Queen Elizabeth was 10, while Margaret was 6 at the time their childless uncle abdicated the throne. Lizzie's father became king, and just like that, she was on track to become the next Queen of England, once her father was gone, of course. That happened not too long after, and Elizabeth went on to become the longest-serving monarch in history. But during Elizabeth's time as queen, her beloved sister Margaret had to remain under her shadow. This would be quite strange for Margaret to do, being that she was the outgoing and fun-loving type, and considering how close she was to her sister, partying alone would be a new experience for her. All the same, Elizabeth had palace duties to attend to, and being that she was now queen, had to conduct herself in a certain manner. Their different personalities could have easily strained their relationship, just as it had done with many other siblings in the royal family. But thanks to what biographer Andrew Morton calls a primal bond, that was never going to happen. In an excerpt from the book Elizabeth and Margaret, The Intimate World of the Windsor Sisters, Morton says, "Throughout their lives, Elizabeth and Margaret butted heads. The sensible older sister matched with the mischievous, wilful little sister. But even as opposite as they were, nothing seemed to be able to tear them apart. However, their bond with one another would be tested sooner than they thought. But how hard could the test be? What could possibly cause a rift between the Windsor sisters? Let's try 3 bad romances, a constitutional crisis, and a lot of scandals." 2 different women. The House of Windsor has a habit of producing at least one well-behaved heir and one charming but explosive sibling. Andrew Morton gave interesting examples, including Charles the Patient versus Andrew the Foolish, William the Cautious matched against reckless Harry. Elizabeth and Margaret's case was no different from the aforementioned, as the former was the responsible one, while the other was the party freak. The funny thing is, their physical resemblance was so strong that the differences in their personalities were the best way to truly tell them apart. As the Queen, Elizabeth would start her mornings with a strict monarchical routine, but as for Margaret, she would wake up as late as she liked and light as many cigarettes as she craved before taking a bath run by her ladies-in-waiting. Margaret also loved to mix with a pool of British celebrities and bohemians who I'm sure also enjoyed having a princess in their company. The house guest from hell. Princess Margaret was very charming and fun to be with. She drank, smoked, and partied as hard as she could. She could easily steal the spotlight and become the star of the show, much to the delight of everyone in her presence. However, she was also known to have a very insulting tongue, and she never held back when it was time to let loose. When she first met Grace Kelly, she said to her, "Well, you don't look like a movie star." In a similar fashion, she told Elizabeth Taylor that her engagement ring was vulgar, and after a string of insults and exploitation of royal protocol, Princess Margaret earned herself the title the house guest from hell. The forbidden romance. One of the biggest differences between Princess Margaret and her sister the Queen was certainly their love lives. Margaret's relationship choices nearly destroyed the sisters' lifelong bond and even threatened the monarchy. Ever since the love affair between King Edward and divorcee Wallis Simpson caused a constitutional crisis, the royal family was eager to avoid any more romantic scandals. This is why Princess Margaret's relationship with a divorced Peter Townsend, who was also 16 years her senior, was going to be a huge problem. Princess Margaret knew this, and that is why the two kept their relationship secret. However, she gave everyone reason to suspect when at her sister's coronation, she was caught tenderly brushing off a piece of fluff from Townsend's uniform. The intimacy displayed at that moment was more than enough for the British press to publish stories of their romance afterward. Meanwhile, Queen Elizabeth had asked the couple to give her a year to settle in before deciding if she would allow them to marry. But within that time, the courtiers had panicked and sent Group Captain Townsend to Brussels to serve as air attaché at the British Embassy. Princess Margaret was in Rhodesia at that time, and only found out about this when she returned home. Margaret chooses between status and love. Astonishingly, Peter Townsend and Princess Margaret were together for the next 3 years, waiting for a decision to be made regarding their marriage. And while the Queen was nervous about the disapproval of her Parliament and the Church of England, she still supported her dear sister and gave her permission to marry Townsend. However, this came with terms and conditions, as Margaret was allowed to keep her royal title and allowance, but she would have to renounce her rights of succession and those of her children and marry in a civil ceremony. It took Princess Margaret only 3 days to choose her status over her love, as she broke up with Townsend afterward. In a statement, Margaret said, and I quote, "Mindful of the Church's teaching that Christian marriage is indissoluble and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have decided to put these considerations before any others. I am deeply grateful for the concern of all those who have constantly constantly prayed for my happiness. It is not for us to say if Margaret's decision was influenced by the royal courtiers or her loyalty to the crown, but one thing we know for sure is that whatever her reasons were, she ended up remaining by her sister's side. Princess Margaret meets Anthony. After Margaret and Townsend broke up, they agreed not to marry anyone else. However, it took Townsend only 4 years to meet and propose to a Belgian woman who he was 25 years older than. As you would imagine, Margaret felt betrayed and heartbroken by this, and within a year, she met and married Anthony Armstrong Jones. Anthony, who was a magazine photographer, was the first commoner to marry a king's daughter in 400 years. The Queen also gave her new brother-in-law the title of Earl of Snowdon. Apparently, the royal family liked him more than they liked Townsend, says Anne de Courcy, who wrote in a biography of the Earl. De Courcy also said, and I quote, "He felt devotion to the royal family, to the Queen, who he admired immensely." Surprisingly, the marriage made Princess Margaret a calmer and more devoted person. She had 2 children with Anthony and remained close to her sister. However, things took a surprising turn, as Margaret and Anthony had fallen out of love with each other to the point where her husband would leave "I hate you" notes in her personal belongings. Now, with the marriage in turmoil, the royal family had another romantic scandal staring them in the face. Margaret's final years. Roddy Llewellyn was just 25 years old when he hooked up with 43-year-old Princess Margaret at a party in Scotland. He was a gardener having fun, and she was a heartbroken princess looking to forget her sorrows. Sparks flew immediately, but they kept their relationship a secret, as they didn't want any backlash from the royal family. But in true paparazzi fashion, the cameras caught the two as they were on a secret vacation on a beach in the Mustic Islands. What followed was a barrage of British tabloid publications which exposed the relationship between a married British princess and her lover, who they described as her boy toy. This infuriated members of Parliament, calling the princess a floozy and a parasite. But despite all the pressure from the people closest to her, Margaret didn't give up on Roddy, and in 1978, she followed the footsteps of King Henry VIII by divorcing her husband, Anthony Armstrong Jones, making her the first royal since the former king to do so. Henceforth, she limited her public appearances and chose to spend more time on the Mustic Islands with the young Roddy. Unfortunately for her, Roddy decided to break up with the princess after 8 years of dating, and from then on, she decided to spend the rest of her life holidaying with close friends and making occasional appearances with her sister, the Queen. As the years rolled through, the more Margaret's health deteriorated. All the alcohol and cigarettes had finally caught up with her, and she died in her sleep in 2002 due to a stroke. At Margaret's funeral, Queen Elizabeth, who was known for being stoic, was seen wiping tears from her eyes, and this was one of the very few times she has been seen crying in public. It is safe to say that at the end of all of Margaret's relationship, the most meaningful one she had was the one with her sister, Queen Elizabeth. Tell us what you think about their bond in the comments section, and if you enjoyed watching this video, give it a like and a share. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell for more interesting videos like this.